How's it going, guys? This is Peet from the FreedomInGod YouTube channel. So how did life begin? The naturalistic origin of life is also known as abiogenesis, or sometimes known as chemical evolution. The origin of life is a huge problem for those who insist that life arose through purely natural processes. Some evolutionists try to claim that the origin of life is not a part of evolution. However, when discussing the existence and the diversity of life at all, it requires an origin point, and probably every evolutionary biology textbook has a section on the origin of life in the chapters of evolution. It is only recently that some defenders of evolution have tried to remove the origin of life from consideration. This is probably because the hope of finding an answer is rapidly fading when we see the complexity in even the simplest living cells. The smallest known organism that is known to exist capable of independent growth and reproduction is a Mycoplasma genitalium, which has 460 genes. Genes are found in every living creature, and it is the instructions in DNA that are in charge of different functions, like making proteins or what the organism is like, its appearance, how it survives, and how it behaves in its environment, etc. There is a thing known as the minimal gene set concept. In the year 2000, they tried to reduce the number of genes of the Mycoplasma genitalium to find how far they are able to reduce it to, because as an evolutionist, you have to start with 0 genes and build up from there. In 2006, they published that the minimum number of genes that they could reduce it to was 397 genes. They couldn't go below that. It's like a car, you can take out the bumper and the car will still function, but you cannot take out the motor. So you have to go from 0 to 397 genes at one go for the simplest cell to exist. So what are the odds of these 397 genes to come together at the same time at one point? The odds are 0. It's impossible. The genes in the DNA consist of information that can only originate from intelligence and could only have been created. You wouldn't argue a book with words came from itself. Likewise, we cannot argue DNA came by itself. It's not religious to say a computer was created. Saying who created it might be, but saying a computer was created is not a religious statement. Likewise, saying life was created is logical and scientific. Evolutionists like to say that they are only claiming they do not know, but the thing is we do know. We do know life had to be created and could not have formed by itself from inanimate objects. How else would you get these 397 genes to come together at one point? And that's the simplest life form. Everything that has information and is complex must have been created. You see, a minimal free-living cell that can manufacture its components using chemicals and energy obtained from its surrounding environment and reproduce itself must have a cell membrane, a way of storing the information, a way of reading the information, a means of manufacturing the cell's biochemical needs from the simpler chemicals in its environment, a means of copying the information and passing it on to its offspring, and these are just the basics. The first cell had to be free-living. That is, it could not depend on other cells for its survival because other cells did not exist. Parasites cannot be a model for first life because they need existing cells to survive. If the theory of evolution was true, we should not see a sudden explosion of fully formed complex life in the fossil record. Instead, that is precisely what we find. Evolutionist Jeffrey Schwartz, a professor of anthropology at the University of Pittsburgh, openly admits that the formation of new species by any mechanism has never been observed. Even evolutionist Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard University has admitted that the record shows that species do not change. The following is how he put it during a lecture at Harvard and William Smith College. Every paleontologist knows that most species do not change. That's bothersome, brings terrible distress. They may get a little bigger or bumpier, but they remain the same species, and that's not due to imperfection and gaps, but stasis. And yet, this remarkable stasis has generally been ignored as no data. If they don't change, it's not evolution, so you don't talk about it. The odds of even a single cell assembling itself by chance are so low that they aren't even worth talking about. The following is an excerpt from Jonathan Gray's book entitled The Forbidden Secret. Even the simplest cell you can conceive of would require no less than 100,000 DNA base pairs and a minimum of about 10,000 amino acids to form the essential protein chain, not to mention the other things that would also be necessary for the first cell. Bear in mind that every single base pair in the DNA chain has to have the same molecular orientation, left hand or right hand. As well as that, virtually all the amino acids must have the opposite orientation, and everyone must be without error. Now, to randomly obtain those correct orientations, do you know your chances? If you attempted a trillion combinations every second for 15 billion years, the odds you would achieve all the correct orientations would still only be 1 chance in a trillion, and the trillions would continue 2,755 times. It would be like winning more than 4,700 state lotteries in a row with a single ticket purchased for each. In other words, impossible. So the conclusion is that life did not arise by physics and chemistry without intelligence. The intelligence needed to create life, even the simplest life, is far greater than that of humans. We are still scratching around trying to understand fully how the simplest life form works. There is much yet to be learned of even the simplest bacterium. Indeed, as we learn more, the problem of the origin of life gets more difficult. The solution does not get nearer, it gets further away. But the real problem is this. The origin of life yells at us that there is a super intelligent creator of life, and that is just not acceptable to the secular mind of today. The origin of life is about as good as it gets in terms of scientific proof for the existence of God. Thank you everyone for watching, and there is only true freedom in God. Have a blessed day, guys.